Hello?
Are you aware of Krebs?
Clean renewable energy bonds?
Yes.
Yeah, that's how Albuquerque got financed for the city.
Okay, they rarely get funding. That's one thing that our senators could try to push to put within a budget at some point. I know, but the Democratic Party is looking for an energy platform.
Well, Krebs exists. I mean, there is funding in the
Well, I
pool.
mean, yeah,
There is
it's
current
just-
funding in the pool.
It's just so small.
Well, let's
Yeah.
use it up until it's gone. Yeah, I
Well-
think there's still several hundred million.
I'd like to start the Sustainable Santa Fe Commission meeting. We have ensconced, Tom, your presentation in the commission meeting, so we have to do a few items to get this started. First, I want to say it is a thrill to be sitting in the mayor's seat, and I know he's watching us, but he is not here by phone. So, hello, Mayor Gonzalez, and thank you for joining us. I'd like to take roll call, although we have some commissioners who will be coming later. Here.
Rob Hirsch, Kathleen Holian,
Here.
Luciano, Kimberly is
Excused, yeah, and
do not have a quorum.
we do, yeah, thank you. I'd like to approve the agenda with one change, and that is in order to really move forward with Tom Solomon's talk, to move the action items report after Melissa McDonald's presentation. So with that change,
We cannot approve it
we can't approve it.
since we don't have a quorum.
Good, so
I'll put it down then.
yeah, perfect. All right, and we can go back to the agenda when the other commissioners are here. We can't approve the minutes. I'd like to, I know there are just a couple of people in the audience who have comments, so communications from the floor. But before doing that, I just want to acknowledge Councilor Ives. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I know a couple of points that needed to be made, if you would, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Singham. I work with Tom at 350 New Mexico. You may know that some of the legislation, the 100% renewable bill that Tom will be talking about, was proposed, put into the Senate this year. And it was the #1 priority for the consortium of all the various environmental and climate groups in the state. And we have some petitions, as all good climate organizations carry with them at all times. So if you have not signed the petition but just generically supports this legislation, I'm going to pass these paperwork around, and if you are interested and would support it, then bring it up.
Great, thank you.
If we're looking at the Santa Fe County, but
Yes.
If anybody needs talking, they need to go up to the podium
Oh.
and talk.
Okay, anybody speaking needs to go through that microphone.
Testing. Okay.
Oh, okay. So anyone who speaks needs to go to the podium and be on camera. Rob, if you could come up here, please. Any other announcements from the floor? And let me ask you, please, to sign in. Typically, in a commission meeting, we go around the room, but this is going to take way too long. So please sign in so that we know who you are.
This is the sign, and some of you have signed it. I'm just going to pass it.
If you would. Thank you very much. So without further ado, we have the privilege and the pleasure of having Tom Solomon here to make a presentation on 100% clean renewable energy for New Mexico with some slides on adapting to Santa Fe County. Tom is co-coordinator of 350.org New Mexico. He is a retired electrical engineer from Intel, 34 years at Intel. That's a long time. After that, he became an activist, and so he helped run President Obama's campaign in 2012, and now co-leads the 350.org New Mexico chapter. We plan to have Tom speak. We could probably move faster through the presentation if we hold questions to the end, unless you have an absolutely burning question and we can't move on without an answer to that. But we're looking forward to about 20 minutes of Q&A. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Tom.
Okay. Thank you, Beth, and thank you for the honor of addressing your commission. And I understand Mayor Gonzalez is on the phone, so hello, Mayor. Thank you for joining us. Commissioners, so my name is Tom Solomon, as Beth said, and I have been with 350 New Mexico for about 4 years now, since late 2012. And one of the things that we have worked on very hard as 350 is to put together a solution plan for actually both the U.S. and specifically for New Mexico, showing in some detail how it would be that the state of New Mexico could actually convert to 100% renewable electricity. And that's what I'd like to share with you today with some additional slides specific to Santa Fe. So let's get right into it. That's my contact information, tasolomon6@gmail.com, and my cell phone number. If you want to contact me, feel free to do so. So the primary message that I'd like to have you come away with is that clean renewable energy for the state of New Mexico has so many benefits, and key among them is economic growth, which gosh knows we need in this state. So we need to sort of revive our economy. We are, 49th or 50th in most surveys. We need to preserve a livable climate for all of humanity, which is a kind of important thing, and make the state a healthier place to live. And implementing a bold new renewable portfolio standard, or RPS, for electricity for the state of New Mexico is a key strategy to do that. We have a current renewable portfolio standard in place, the Renewable Energy Act of 2007, but it maxes out at 20% renewable energy by 2020. And so beyond 2020, there are no further requirements, and we'd like to see it go all the way to 100%. 100% by 2050 is a key strategy that came out of the the International Paris Climate Accords, and in order to, keep the planet from warming below 2 degrees C, which is an absolute requirement for a livable climate, that's pretty much what needs to happen. So we are proposing in a bill in the state of New Mexico something that gets us towards that goal. And I want to emphasize, because it's a misconception on some people's part, that this will have an impact on oil jobs in the state of New Mexico, and it just will not. We're talking about converting electricity generation to 100% renewable energy. We do not generate electricity from burning oil in the state of New Mexico, and hardly at all nationally. It just is not used for that purpose. We refine oil into gasoline for transportation. It's not used for electricity. And in addition to that, 7% or less of New Mexico's natural gas production is used for electricity in the state. The vast majority of it is either exported or used for building heating or heating water. So it really, this proposal largely does not impact at all jobs in the oil and gas sector. So it's an important issue to get out of the way up front. So why is it so urgent to move to 100% renewable energy? For one thing, it is hugely popular in the populace at large. This is a Pew Research study from June of 2016. If you ask people in the public whether they support expanding solar power or wind power, you get these overwhelming majorities of like 7-1 in favor of doing that, and majorities oppose additional investments in offshore drilling, nuclear power, fracking, and coal mining. People want renewable energy. This is a broadly bipartisan supported issue. It is even supported by 75% of the voters who voted for Donald Trump. So the public wants this, and I would urge public organizations to support what the public wants. The fundamental reason that drives the need to do this, among other things, is that global warming is absolutely happening right now. It's a chart from NASA showing the amount of warming we've seen since the 1880s, and it's just been going up and up and up as the level of CO2, the global warming gas that traps heat in the atmosphere, has been rising and rising, because burning coal, oil, and natural gas creates carbon dioxide that builds up in the atmosphere, and like a greenhouse, it traps heat, and we are seeing that in reality. 2014 and then 2015 and then 2016 have been successively the hottest years on record. Turns out July of 2017 was the warmest month that we've ever seen, so the warming is happening in front of our eyes. And as long as we continue to build up CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to continue to go up to some really alarming levels if we don't stop this. And the CO2 levels that are causing it are now higher than at any time in all of human history. This is a chart from NASA that goes back 800,000 years, long farther than when human beings evolved on this planet. We have never seen CO2 levels during all of that time above 300 parts per million in the atmosphere, and that is what maintained a stable climate to allow the current version of life on Earth to evolve and survive. And all of human civilization that developed in the last, call it 10,000 years, within a pretty stable regime for carbon dioxide levels and warming of the atmosphere. And we are now far beyond that. We are past 400 parts per million, way out of that zone of where human life developed. And the projections, if we continue on this path, are we get to 550 to somewhere between there and 900 parts per million by the end of the century, which is just catastrophic for all life on Earth, and including human civilization. One of the major consequences of that was outlined in a study published by the National Academy of Sciences a few years back. And they published this chart, which is what happens to crop yields over time and as global warming continues to proceed. And so the horizontal axis is global warming in degree, 1 degree, 2 degree, 3, and then 4 degrees C. And you can see how the percentage change in crop yields declines as warming proceeds. So if you put a time frame to this from other sources in the literature, which I've done in this table on the left side, we might see 2 degrees C in the 2040s, and where global crop yields would be down by like 30%. In the 2050s at 3 degrees C, 40% lower, and in the 2060s, if we continue on our path, we'll hit 4 degrees C, and at the same time, when the global human population is growing from about 7 billion to 9 billion people, we may see our crop yields go down below 50% below what they are today. And if we can't feed the human population, you will see unimaginable human strife and suffering and famine and war, and that is the future that we are painting for ourselves as we continue to do what we're doing. So this next page I kind of put into a narrative from various sources in the literature that was kind of re-emphasized by a magazine, a New York magazine, on July 9th. There's a little link to it on the upper right-hand corner. Some people may have seen it. It's called The Uninhabitable Earth, and it pretty much supports the scenario that I'm showing here. So, the major food shortages in the 2030s, extensive starvation, 4 to 8 times worse wildfires in the 2040s. Most summers will be heat waves worse than the one in 2003 in the European Union that killed 30 to 50,000 people. And by the 2060s on this path, it's pretty much game over, and the best climate scientists say we are headed towards a future where the ecosystem on the planet will be able to support less than 1 billion people. And if we start with 9 billion people and we can't grow enough food to support more than 1 billion, you can paint for yourselves the horrible scenario that it will take to live through this future that we are painting for all of our children and their children. And that is not the future I want my kids to grow into. So impacts of global warming are being felt right now. Significant increases in wildfires and in heat waves, in drought and crop destruction, significant famine going on right now in the Middle East and Africa. The coral reefs around the world are dying. More than half of the Great Barrier Reef is dead. Most of the coral reefs off the Florida coast are dead. I encourage you to see a film showing right now on Netflix called Chasing Coral that paints this in quite a lot of detail. We are now seeing flooding at high tide in Miami to about 6 to 12 inches today, routinely. They are actively engaged in spending hundreds of millions of dollars raising their streets in Miami to avoid this. And of course, Hurricane Sandy, significant flooding. The projections for Florida and Louisiana in particular towards the end of the century, possibly 3 to 6 meters of sea level rise, that's the areas that will be underwater. So, if this were a foreign country invading and taking that amount of land away from us, we would be in full battle mode right now fighting against this threat. And I urge us to act like that's happening. So what we have to do instead is urgently mobilize to convert our energy system away from the fossil fuels that are causing this warming to happen and convert to carbon-free renewables. And phase 1 of that is to address the most significant source of CO2 pollution, which is electricity generation. Phase 2, which we're not going to talk about today, is renewable transportation like electric vehicles. Encourage you to look into that if you haven't already. But we're going to talk about phase 1. So the sources of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere in the United States, mostly from electric power. 39.4% comes from the electric sector, most of that from burning coal, some from natural gas. And electricity generation in this country, most of it comes from large concentrated power plants burning coal, burning natural gas, or nuclear energy. Those are the 3 largest sources of electricity generation. A growing sector on the right is from clean renewable energy like hydroelectric, wind and solar mostly. And that gets built in these big power plants, goes to the big high-tension lines that sends it around the country, and then to your local electric utility, and then it comes to your home. And the pie chart of electricity generation in the United States in this last year is about 30% from coal, 34% from natural gas, about 20% from nuclear, and a growing amount from hydro, wind, and solar. So that's where electricity comes from. Does not come from burning oil. We just don't do that for electricity. And if you look at the annual share of electricity generation by source in this country, you can see that electricity from coal has been declining pretty rapidly over time, especially in the last 20 years or so, mostly being replaced by growing natural gas production. So the threat to coal jobs is really not in the recent times from growing renewable energy. It's being replaced by natural gas production. Looking at New Mexico specifically, a much higher share of generation in this state comes from coal. It's about 63%, about 28% from natural gas, and a big chunk from wind and solar. It is also true that PNM, as a specific utility, imports some nuclear energy from out of state from Arizona's Palo Verde nuclear station. So most of New Mexico is much more intensively getting their power from coal than the national average. So moving kind of towards what we are proposing here is a change to state law, which is a modification of the Renewable Energy Act of 2007, and it was introduced last session as SB 312. And it urges the New Mexico State Legislature to move towards 100% renewable energy by 2050. And it's a multi-year campaign. We introduced it in 2017. The intent is to pass it into law in the next long session in 2019. And we are moving towards that goal. And by the way, this is the essence of the petition that's being passed around for you today. And if you're interested in helping us get this passed, I urge you to sign it. The essence of the of Senate Bill 312 is to propose an increase in the renewable portfolio standard that looks like this schedule. So it grows at about 3% per year towards 100% by 2050, starting at the 20% by 2020, which is kind of where current law caps things. And then we go to 50% by 2030, 80% by 2040. And it turns out in the political realm, we ended up compromising to kind of only target the 80% by 2040 phase in Senate Bill 312. Still on schedule to get us to 100%, but that's what we thought was the most that we can get past. So Senate Bill 312 essentially proposes 50% by 2030, 80% by 2040 for renewable generation of electricity in the state of New Mexico. Okay. New Mexico is one of the states that has an existing renewable portfolio standard, and when it was first introduced in 2007, it was among the leaders in the United States for RPS legislation. It is no longer. There are now 10 states in the state of, in the country of the United States that have stronger RPS standards, including 50% goals in California and Oregon and New York State, and 75% in Vermont, and the list of states is there. So we are proposing that New Mexico should get back in a leadership position where we used to be and have a much stronger renewable portfolio standard that is among the leaders of the rest of the states. So that's a reason why. As our model for what we propose, we look to the work from Stanford University out of the Solutions Project. And this is from Professor Mark Z. Jacobson, who's a professor at Stanford. And he is part of the solutionsproject.org. And he has published a chart like this for every state in the union, which proposes what the renewable energy mix should be for that state based on its indigenous renewable resources, right? So New Mexico's 12th best in the nation for wind, it's number 2 in solar, and we're among the top 10 for geothermal. So the mix for New Mexico is half wind, 40% solar, and 10% geothermal. And that takes advantages of what we have in this state. So that's the baseline of the model that we propose, heading towards this mix as we go towards 100%. And if you crunch the numbers in the spreadsheet that I built, it says if you do all of that and propose some declining costs based on historical rates of decline, especially for solar, but also for wind and somewhat for geothermal, this is what you end up with. For the state of New Mexico to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050, we would basically be installing about 200 megawatts per year of nameplate capacity for electrical generation, and it would be about 103 megawatts a year for solar panels, 87 megawatts per year for wind, about 10 for geothermal, and at those costs. And the bottom line is, on average, over that time frame, we're talking about $178 million a year investment. So it's not actually a big number. That is about 9% of the total revenue for electricity, utilities, and co-ops in the state of New Mexico. So that number, we're talking about investing about 9% of their revenue stream. Eminently doable. And that gets you to supplying the 23 million megawatt hours of electricity that we consumed last year. I'm projecting that the energy consumption is flat over time, which is, based on recent history, is reasonable. This is why it will work. Old power plants have to be replaced as they age, and New Mexico's current fleet of coal-fired power plants are very old. They average 40 years old. The average replacement time frame for a coal-fired power plant is about 48 years, and so in the near term, we will need to be retiring these coal plants, whether we like it or not. And passing a renewable portfolio standard encourages the state of New Mexico and our utilities to do the right thing for our future in terms of costs, in terms of health, in terms of preserving a livable climate, to replace these old sources of power generation with clean renewable energy, because that would be a mandate. It has worked so far very well for the existing renewable portfolio standard. We want to keep on that path. And it helps them replace it with sources of renewable energy, electricity, that will have zero fuel cost. So by doing the upfront investment in the capital cost, you end up with a fuel-free resource over time, and your electricity costs will ultimately go down. It's the same model as people who decide to put solar panels on their roof. They have to spend money upfront to buy the solar panels, but then, hey, I got no electric bill. And so you're paying for it over time in the savings on your electric bill. It's the same theory. Electric utilities will end up doing the major investment, plus some investment by cities, businesses, and homeowners. And if we can pass a community solar bill, renters will do that too. We need to do that so everybody can participate. Costs will ultimately drop. And for businesses wanting to move into New Mexico to do business here, giving them a predictable cost for electricity provides some benefit. It's lower risk for their cost scenarios. So that provides some benefit, because if you have no fuel costs, you know exactly what your electricity is going to be. And of course, New Mexico has tremendous natural advantages that we can leverage here: available land and wind and solar and geothermal resources, and a tremendously underemployed workforce that we want to employ. As you invest in this renewable energy, this is how you pay for itself. So the state of New Mexico spends over $480 million a year on fuel, mostly in coal and gas, to generate electricity. And at the end of this investment in renewables, we will be spending $0 on fuel over time. So this shows you how doing the upfront investment in renewable energy, that green line on the top that declines to the right, ends up with increasing fuel savings as you have more and more fuel-free electricity over time. And by the 2030 timeframe, your fuel savings relative to what you used to be spending basically pay for all the future investment in renewable energy to get you to 100%. So moving on to some things specific to Santa Fe, I'm going to talk about the following items, and I'm a little bit behind time, so I'm just going to get right into it. Beth asked me to do an analysis that took kind of the chart that I just showed you for, fuel costs declining over time and how much would it take to invest in the renewable energy to replace all of the electricity consumed by Santa Fe County. And in summary, the results are on this page, and I'll let you read it, but I'm just going to point to the summary line. So if you look at the box in the middle in red, on average, you would be spending about $12.8 million a year over the 20 or 30-year time frame starting in 2021. So $12.8 million a year to buy about 14.3 megawatts of generation for a total of 430 megawatts of nameplate capacity. That would supply all of the electricity required by Santa Fe County residents if you assume that they match the per capita electricity consumption for the state of New Mexico. Okay, so that's a Santa Fe County scenario. The city of Santa Fe has already moved significantly towards this direction, and I applaud you all. So the following goals were established in 2014: 50% of energy from renewables by 2025, and for the city to be carbon neutral by 2040. And there's a current resolution, I guess, under consideration for the city staff to do a feasibility study to look at transitioning all city facilities to 100% renewables by 2025. And so great progress and continuing in that direction. And the city of Santa Fe is already using about 23% of its electricity, mostly from solar, by renewable energy. And so 5 megawatts is 23% of city facility use. The list of the projects are right there, and the funding sources are in that bottom line. Some general obligation bonds and New Mexico Finance Authority and power purchase agreements. So moving in the right direction for the city of Santa Fe. Looking at the city of Albuquerque, they're doing something in at least the similar direction. A resolution was approved by the city council to get 25% of all city facilities from just solar by 2025. And interestingly, when it was first proposed, it was very controversial in the city council, which is a little more bipartisan than maybe the city of Santa Fe council. And so there was some resistance to doing it. So they went back, did a financial analysis, a quote from an actual solar installer that said, these are the actual rooftops that we would install it in, how much it would cost, how much it would generate, and how much it would save. And it turns out it saves the city money with a 6-year payback, and the first 50% of the projects that have been approved are cash positive from year one. So it ends up actually reducing the electric bill for the city of Albuquerque, just like it would for anybody who puts solar on their rooftop. It works for cities too. So when this was presented, the vote was 9-0. Unanimous at the city council. It passed because it just makes so much financial sense. And by the way, Senator Heinrich's office is working on a suite of kind of financing tools that they intend to make available on a website to all of Santa Fe and actually all the world, I guess. Anybody got a web connection? And it will show you how other cities can follow down this path. So if they want to make investments for renewables for their city facilities, look within the next month or two from something coming out from Senator Heinrich to show the way. Look forward to that. For rural electric co-ops, of which there are 19 in the state of New Mexico, Kit Carson Electric has actually blazed the way, and they've committed to getting 30% of their electricity by 2022 from just solar, and 100% of their electricity on a sunny day from solar. And to do that, they bought out their existing contract with Tri-State Electric, who had been their previous electricity supplier but was too tied to coal and too expensive. And they found in Kit Carson Electric that by doing this and committing to renewable electricity, they were going to save their customers $50 million over 10 years, including the cost of buying out their contract from Tri-State. Think about that. It pays for itself. So, moving forward, as we look at 2019, in order to kind of advance this direction and helping the state of New Mexico move towards 100% renewable energy, we will reintroduce something like Senate Bill 312. It will have a different number, no doubt. but look for that towards 80% renewables by 2040. There's also likely to be a community choice aggregation bill that has been proposed and supported by New Energy Economy. And there's a community solar called Community Solar Gardens bill. 2 versions of it were introduced, didn't pass, but we want to get it passed in 2019. That allows people that don't own their own roof to participate in solar energy. So if you're a renter, you can still buy solar. And then we'd like to extend the recently expired New Mexico solar tax credit to make it more financially attractive for people to install solar. And since the city of Santa Fe has committed to being carbon neutral, including transportation, there's an important bill that should be passed to legalize Tesla electric vehicle sales in the state of New Mexico. A little known fact is that it is currently illegal for Tesla as an electric vehicle manufacturer to have a sales office or a service facility in the state of New Mexico, a bill that was passed with the full support of the New Mexico Auto Dealers Association. So the statute that you'd want to amend is listed there. I encourage you to look forward into that because Tesla is the #1 electric vehicle manufacturer in the world and is going to be going great guns. I bet a lot of Santa fans would like to buy a Tesla. So, if you're a homeowner or a business and you'd like to figure out how to install solar on your roof, there's a great website put together by the Department of Energy. It's called EnergySage.com, and if you enter just your address and your average electric bill, just those 2 pieces of information, you will get an instant solar quote and an estimate for what it would cost you to install the amount of solar to take care of your electricity needs and how fast it will pay back and how it benefits your property values. And so that's an example. I picked actually a home on Rodriguez Street a few blocks from here. This is what it would look like for that home on Rodriguez Street. So it tells you the net cost after incentives, $11,000, pays it back in 8.1 years if you pay cash, and inflates your home values by 3%. I've just put this in here for paid political advertising. There are communities around the country that are now requiring new home construction to include solar on their roof. And it just makes so much sense right now. The cheapest way to finance solar panels on your roof is to do it when it's designed in, upfront, financed with your mortgage. It's the cheapest source of financing that you're going to get, and the homeowner that moves in will have no electric bill. And it's beneficial all around. It's the best way to do it. So think about that. The benefits of moving to renewable energy is, of course, getting jobs of the future in a growing economic sector, replacing jobs of the past, plus cleaner air and water, less water consumption because you're not boiling water to generate electricity from solar and wind, and electrical generation is one of the highest users of water, a precious resource in the state of New Mexico. And healthier New Mexicans. The butcher's bill for fossil fuel pollution in terms of disease and death for the state of New Mexico is very high, estimated to cost the state of New Mexico something like $2.4 billion a year in medical costs and death. And by the way, the state of New Mexico budget is about 31% for Medicaid. So as we go towards this solution, New Mexicans will be healthier, they will have less asthma, lung and heart disease, there will be less medical bills, and the state budget ultimately will benefit. And by the way, it'll help stop climate change. New Mexico is already a great state for these resources, solar and wind, number 12 in wind, number 2 in solar, and we are building out those solar facilities and those wind facilities. Solar specifically on the Eastern Plains and in and around the town of Vaughn is where the fastest wind speeds are, and we are building solar plants all around the state. There is no part of New Mexico that isn't world-class for solar. And by the way, if you built solar panels, just as a thought exercise, and a little square somewhere between 60 and 70 miles on a side, you could stick it in the boot heel, it would power the entire country of the United States with solar energy. there is that much solar available in New Mexico. Geothermal is also a great resource in this, for the state of New Mexico. That's why the model for renewables is about 10% geothermal. And there is one geothermal plant down around Lordsburg existing and running in the state of New Mexico, and we should build about a facility of that size about every year going forward. Solar jobs are absolutely booming in the country. Take a look at the growth in solar compared to oil and gas and coal jobs. That's where the growth is in terms of jobs. And the cost picture for renewable energy is just astonishing. Wind costs have dropped 66% over the last 7 years and 85% for solar. And those costs continue to decline, and they are basically at a point where they're cost parity with other sources of renewable energy, and in fact cheaper in many cases. So the cheapest sources of new electrical generation that you can build is basically solar and wind. And that's why coal-fired power plants around the country are closing, and why we are basically not building new ones. An interesting thing happened in the middle of last year. If you look at the new electrical generating capacity that was brought online month by month, basically around June, we stopped building significant new natural gas plants. And after that, it was pretty much all solar and wind because the costs are so attractive. The solar industry in the state of New Mexico, nearly 3,000 jobs, 2,900. There are, 102 solar companies in the state of New Mexico. Average median, or the median wage for a solar installer is like $20 an hour, a very good middle-class wage. And these solar companies are all around the state, and it's a growing part of the economic picture for the state of New Mexico. And in fact, nationwide, solar jobs in the entire country are growing 17 times faster than the average rest of the economy in the United States, 17 times faster. If you look at an analysis of moving, if we were to extend the renewable portfolio standard, my numbers say that we should add a good 1,000 more jobs because we will need to pretty rapidly increase the rate at which we're installing solar, and the numbers say it's about another 1,000 jobs that we would need by 2021. So that's another big boost to the New Mexico economy that we desperately need. And that's even if we don't bring in solar panel manufacturing, which we absolutely should to this state. Here's another interesting fact for wind power. California, my home state, has been one of the leaders for renewable energy. They have committed to 50% renewable energy by the year 2030, significantly in advance of the requirement for New Mexico. But if you look at their available wind resource, it's really pretty minor. And it's not only fairly minor, it is largely built out. They've been building wind farms in California for decades, and so the available windy hillsides are largely covered with wind turbines today. So as they commit to and need to bring in more wind energy, they're going to be looking for other states nearby, and the closest windy state to California is New Mexico. And that is why you see lots and lots of wind turbines going up on the eastern plains, not for domestic consumption in the state of New Mexico, but being shipped west to states including California, because that's where the consumption demand is. We should be building those wind turbines here, and we should be building them to supply power for the state of New Mexico. Some of those big wind projects are these listed here on the eastern plains: El Cabo, Broadview, and Grady. And you can see some of the major transmission lines that are headed west: Centennial West, Sunzia, and the South Line. And so the transmission capacity is being built out now, but it's not for us, it's for California. Let's change that. Let's make it for New Mexico and supply our own power from renewable wind. Here's another interesting fact. This is a chart from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that shows where wind turbine manufacturing facilities are in the U.S. And you can see a huge concentration in and around the Great Lakes and in the Central Plains. There are 3 states in the United States that have no wind turbine manufacturing facilities at all in them, and they are Nevada, Wyoming, and New Mexico. And we are one of the best windy states among that group. And of course, supplying wind turbine output for the state of California. We should be building those wind turbines here because they are enormous. Your wind turbines are like, today they're like 90 meters tall. They're as tall as a football field. And the blades are, too big to fit on a highway on a big truck. So you want to build them nearby where you're going to install them. Let's do it here. Let's get our economic development agency going on this project and pull in some turbine manufacturing plants for the state of New Mexico for those jobs. So in summary, the clean energy sector is booming worldwide. Costs have absolutely dropped, and they continue to drop to make solar and wind the cheapest sources of new energy that you can buy. New Mexico has world-class solar and wind and geothermal resources ready to develop, but we have to have a renewable portfolio standard extended to provide the guaranteed demand so that the companies will build it, and so the incentive is there for the utilities to replace their aging power plants with the clean renewable energy that we know must be built. So let's spark a New Mexico investment boom in clean energy. Let's bring in thousands more of good jobs and commit our state to clean renewable electricity 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And remember, this does not impact the oil and gas sector. We don't generate electricity from oil. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much. So we have time for questions, if there is.
We do, and I want to thank you very much. And you have given us permission to make your presentation available in PDF form. So we will, for any of you who would like that, would you mind if we post it on the Sustainable Santa Fe Commission website? Good. So I'd like to open it to the floor, or first to the commission, I'm sorry, and then to the floor for questions. Just know to turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I love having all these facts and figures that I can now memorize and pass on to my friends. But anyway, what are the statistics now on how much wind turbines affect wildlife? Has the technology improved, or is it a matter of siting them in places where they will not negatively impact wildlife?
All right, well, you have asked the most frequently asked question. So let me pull up my FAQ slide, and I'll get right on that. So it turns out that there is some good published information from the Audubon Society about the impact of wind turbines on birds especially, and they have published data that says, what is it that kills birds? So let me show you. So cats are the #1 source of bird deaths by far. About 2.4 billion birds are killed in the United States because of cats, followed by about 600 million bird deaths a year from building windows, followed by automobiles, a few by power lines, and you really can't see the impact from wind turbines over there on the right-hand side, but there's just a few. And their study from the Audubon Society says that fossil fuel power plants kill 35 times more birds per gigawatt hour than do wind turbines. So the Audubon Society, who I would go to as a source of animal and especially avian wildlife protection, is fully in favor of replacing fossil fuel power plants with wind turbines. And yes, there are things that can be done with wind turbines to minimize their impact. There are ways to predict migratory flocks of birds coming in and to feather some of those wind turbines if they are in that path, or to say, we know what the path of bird migration is and it's going to go down this path because it's very predictable. Let's put fewer wind turbines in that path. There are things that can be done and are being done to mitigate this. Yes.
Thank you for all you have done, Tom, and all you're doing with 350.org and beyond. And I 100% support 100% renewable energy, and I think it's terrific. So just a devil's advocate question in the sense of this article that was, or this piece that was in the Bloomberg News today about flat electricity growth projected in the future, just not a lot of growth projected, a lot of good energy efficiency happening that attributes to that. But the point partially was to say that the existing entities in the portfolios, the gas, the coal, the nuclear, the renewables, are all vying for the same amount. And obviously we want to build on the popularity of renewables because that'll help lead to better elected officials and PRC people. And the cost coming down is a huge driver for doing what you're proposing. But in an unfortunate status quo kind of politics, it's like a lot of this lobbying type influence that's going on that's driving things irrationally. And just wondering statistically how much renewable energy industry give in the lobbying sense in terms of supporting certain campaigns and political efforts versus the similar efforts that are going on in the fossil fuel sectors, nuclear. I mean, is it even worth thinking about upping the amount that renewable energy sector and supporters give to support the existing politicians to do better? Or is it just...
It's absolutely worthwhile, but comparing the available political donation source from renewable energy to the oil and gas sector, the richest industry in the history of the world, it's not even apples and oranges. It's not even grapes and watermelons. It's raisins on watermelons. Right. Sure, the renewable energy industry should and does support political contributions, but the money's not there.
Yeah.
So, but the people are there. The people
Exactly.
are absolutely there, and I continue to aspire to having a government that responds to the will of the people, and if we work towards that, then this will happen because 85% of the people want it.
I agree. And one last point is in the article, it did mention that some of these big oil companies like Exxon have acquired a lot of natural gas assets, and so they are vying for that electricity space too, just as a realistic situation that we're dealing with too. Yeah.
This is all true. It's one reason why, the political path of a renewable portfolio standard is, it works, and it puts in a mandate for the electricity sector to do its conversion, and it's not instantaneous, right? We're talking about 3% per year over the next 30 years. This is not an abrupt transition. It's not going to cause, massive heartbreak for people over time. And for example, the loss of jobs in the coal industry is not new. It's been happening for the last 30, 40 years. So it's just the continuation of a trend. And there are good new jobs that ought to be offered to people that have been and used to work in coal mines and coal-fired power plants, and that's a just transition that is happening all around the country and needs to continue. And it's jobs of the future that are cleaner and healthier, replacing jobs of the past.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that, first of all, terrific presentation. It's going to be very important to build coalitions of cities and counties in New Mexico if we are going to reach 100% renewable energy in the state. And we in Santa Fe City and County are going to be hand-tied to a large extent if we don't change state laws. So the 5 bills that you pointed out are particularly important, especially increasing the renewable portfolio standard. So is 350.org working to build the coalition of clean cities and counties so that when we're positioned to get these bills through, we have a lot of groundswell of support?
So 350 absolutely works in coalition with environmental organizations throughout the state, and there is something called the Environmental Alliance of New Mexico that we are part of, and proposed this bill, Senate Bill 312, with the Alliance last year, they were way behind it. Not only were they way behind it, they put it at the very top of their list of agenda items for the 2017 session. And there was an enormous outpouring of support from environmental groups at every single committee hearing that we have, including calls and emails to legislators ahead of time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Building a coalition of cities is the next step, and we are actively working on it. It's probably going to be led more by the Sierra Club, but we are working with them. And so, yes, we want to work with, especially after Senator Heinrich's website is up and running, that kind of shows these are the tools. Yes, I think we'd like to engage many cities around New Mexico in this same project, because it is happening organically from the ground up in some selected places, like Taos with Kit Carson Electric. The Jemez Electric Utility, I think, is looking into this as well. Santa Fe's been a leader. Albuquerque is doing a decent job, and there are other cities. But yes, local action, if we want to fix our climate in time, is where it's at for the next few years. And yes, we're pursuing
Thank you.
that.
So I think we have a question from our mayor. John, I think he sent you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor Gonzalez sent me a couple of questions for you, Tom.
Hi, Mayor.
His first question is, let me get to it here. How does all of this affect the ratepayer? Have you all done any studies that determine how this would impact rates, particularly for low-income populations from not only within our city, but from around the state?
Yeah. So the endpoint, as I kind of point out in this slide here, is going to be cheaper electricity, because fundamentally, after you pay for the capital investment up front, there is no marginal cost to generating the next kilowatt hour of electricity. It's free. There is no fuel, period. So to get there, you have to do some investment up front. And the financial mechanism to do that is called bonds. And there are clean renewable energy bonds available, including to the city of Albuquerque, that allowed it to do this investment to get 25% solar by 2025 and be cash positive at year one. So there are ways to do it. I am not an expert in electrical generation financing and impact on the ratepayers. There's some very sophisticated tools and software programs like Strategist that do that for utilities. But I am confident that over time it is cheaper than this, cheaper than the current electricity rates.
Yeah.
So the near-term impact, I can't answer. It's a area of analysis that we could use some help doing. But there are electric utilities around the country doing this at not a significant impact to their rate base. So I would look at the electric rates in the states that are ahead of us, like California, like Hawaii, like Oregon, like New York State, and just look for an example of what the rate base impact has been on those populations as an example of, you know, what it might look like for the state of New Mexico. And I haven't done that.
I think that'd be particularly beneficial, especially for Santa Fe,
Good
to
question.
really compare what this would do for residents, whether it would actually raise rates or decrease them, and also for commercial businesses. So if we can figure out how to do that analysis, I think that would definitely help to make the case. His second question is, let me get to it here. What can cities such as ours do now while major changes to the Public Utilities Act are being considered and done to start to scale up solar in our community? And certainly I think you touched upon one, in that we could require all new construction to have 2 kW systems automatically built on them. So I think that certainly would be one of them. But what else do you think might be able to
Other
be done?
ideas, there are, if you're going to go down the road of looking at, building requirements, there's something called the U.S. Green Building Council that has proposals for what energy efficient homes look like. Good insulation, ground heat source pumps for heating, and passive solar and active solar. You can build energy neutral homes today that don't cost a whole lot more than the average home, and then have zero electrical or energy costs going forward. So, you know, I would look to the U.S. Green Building Council website for good ideas for ordinances or building requirements that you would encourage the building community to head towards, to do that for the city. Encourage your businesses to go towards solar, enable them to get low-cost financing, because it is good business for every business that, you know, uses electricity to go to renewable energy because it's cheaper. And there are lots of examples where even battery storage for lots of businesses that use significant electricity in their refrigeration areas or others that can minimize their high demand electrical charges that the electric utilities use to base their highest rates on, and to use battery storage behind the meter to prevent their consumption from spiking when they open their refrigerator doors, et cetera, and they pay lower electric bills. Good business. There is also something called ice energy storage that is a great idea for large buildings, where instead of having air conditioners or swamp coolers that come on in the middle of a summer's day when the power is the most expensive and the load is the highest, that you freeze a block of ice in your basement in advance when power is cheap and wind power is free in the middle of the night, and then you just flow air over that block of ice and circulate that air throughout the building and chill it that way. And it's a way to shift the electric load from the middle of the day to cheap power when renewable energy is available at night. Ice energy storage is another great source of opportunity there. Yeah.
Great.
Great, and he has one last question, Madam Chair. By the way, so the city, as part of its overall strategy to further reduce our electric loads and increase our solar, we are assessing battery storage technologies on some of our large facilities. So if we can shave our peak, that's really what we want to do. The last question relates to infrastructure. He would like to know if you all have done an assessment on the current state of the state's utilities infrastructures and the ability to handle getting to 100% renewable, as well as what would the role of the utilities play in all of this, because certainly somebody would have to develop and actually implement the 100% renewable energy goal. So if you could talk to that, that'd be great.
Okay. Let's see, the first question was transmission?
Infrastructure, particularly as it stands today, given the age of today's current system, you know, what is the capability of the utilities to take on 100% renewable?
Sure, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. So thank you for the questions, Mayor. So let's start with the fact that New Mexico's current electric grid is already in place and is already transmitting all the electricity that anybody needs to consume today. And the projections that I'm using, based on a questioner in the audience, maybe it was yourself, said, you know, energy use has basically been flat. And so I'm projecting that it's flat. So we already have the transmission infrastructure in place today to handle transmitting electricity to the end users. What we may not have is the additional legs of transmission to connect new sources of renewable energy if you put them far away from the existing grid. You can certainly put solar generation close to the existing grid today because it's, you know, every square inch of the state is drenched in sunlight, and you can put them anywhere. So you can put big solar plants by the San Juan generating station up near Farmington and use the existing substations and power lines that are already there as those shut down and get replaced. You could do that, no extra transmission infrastructure required. For wind power generation out of the Eastern Plains, where you don't necessarily have the spurs to connect those wind farms to the central grid, yep, you're going to have to build some. They are already building those transmission lines for export to California today. Yes, there is some transmission investment required. I don't know what that is. I haven't analyzed it. It's not an area of expertise. But you know, the people that are buying our wind power from the state of California already think it's a great deal to pay for the transmission lines and the wind power farms because they need it and it's cheap. So from an investment standpoint, from a cost standpoint, we already know it pays for itself.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd love to open it up to the floor. I know you've
Madam
been.
Chair, may I-
Yes, to gender.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Couple questions on the RPS. The wind is higher than the solar, yet solar is less expensive and will continue going down. Why is that ratio with the wind higher than solar in your proposal?
So, good question. So that's a recommendation from Professor Jacobson. I think it is based on the fact that today, wind power, or certainly recently, wind power has been cheaper than solar. The rate of cost reduction for solar is far faster, however, than for wind, so it's been catching up. And so if he were to redo that analysis, you know, he might find that you'd have a higher percentage of solar than wind. But let me, let's see. If you can.
Well, we're
can you
number
switch
2 in that. and
Yeah,
it's-
can
it
you
seems like we
switch,
should-
can you switch over to the, my screen and I'll show you a slide that may answer that question? Are we up on there? Yeah, let's see. So wind power and solar panel or solar power have a different generation profile. Of course, solar energy you get during the day, nothing at night, right? Wind power blows 24 hours a day, but it peaks more in the winter and it peaks more at the nighttime. So the combination of solar power plus wind power gives you, you know, not absolutely, but close to 100% coverage, certainly on average during the year, with some bumps that you'd want to fill with some other resources like demand response. So you're going to need a mix of both. And I don't know the details of why he came up with that recommendation, but I could imagine that the combination of availability and cost for wind versus solar when he did the analysis, plus the fact that, you know, you need wind power generation at night, you're just going to have some. And anyway.
Okay, one other question is, can you explain how the firm in Florida is handling Kit Carson's electricity needs?
I know that Kit Carson is building their own generation for solar. I think so. It's a combination of that. They're building, what was it, 30 installations of 1 megawatt each for Kit Carson Electric as part of their solar portfolio. To get the additional renewable energy, I think it's Guzman Power from Florida. Guzman Renewables is probably purchasing renewable electricity from the grid and supplying it to Kit Carson Electric as part of that. You can do that. You can, that's the essence of community choice aggregation. There are renewable electricity resources available all over the United States, and they put their power onto the grid, and you can say, I want power out of your wind farm, and they'll ship it over to you on the national grid, and that's what you buy. There's some transmission losses if it's far away, but it's still a good deal. I believe it's a combination of those two things that they're doing.
And one last question, what happens to our utilities when power is so cheap?
Well, that's a good question for our utilities. If they were smart business people, they would be investing in the power of the future so that they can be competitive with, you know, generation that people are going to put on their own roofs and houses. I think they are behind in terms of their business model for what they should be doing. It is possible for electric utilities to continue to survive and thrive. There are electric utilities around the country that are transitioning towards a higher percentage renewable model. I think the state of New York is ahead in that regard. I would look to them as some examples. I'm not an expert in that, but I know that that's the case. They're going to have to change. The world is changing underneath their feet, and it's unstoppable.
Is there any way to make the pain less painful?
Yes, I think there's some things that we could do to partner with them. I would love to have our electric utilities to be allies in this fight rather than adversaries. There are ways that the state of New Mexico could work with our electric utilities to make it easier for them to transition to 100% renewables, and that's probably a discussion for another time. It's a long topic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So now we have a few minutes. I'd like to open it to the floor. Bob, yes. Oh, yes. And Bob, if you wouldn't mind stepping up at the podium, that's where you can be seen.
Is this okay?
That's okay.
All right. I'm Bob Mang, and I have two questions, and both of them go a little beyond where you have been talking about the existing energy reforms. The first is, as you may remember, New Mexico about 8 years ago was working with other states and a couple of provinces in Canada on a cap and trade system. California has just recently extended that, and there are 2 provinces in Canada also a part of it. What are the prospects, and have you thought about New Mexico reviving that in the coming year or so when we might have a change? That's the first question.
Okay.
Why don't you answer that first?
One of the enabling tactics to allow New Mexico to easily and with less pain go towards 100% renewable energy is to increase the size of the grid that we participate in and in which we give and take power to and from. And so participating in, the Western Regional Grid, something like that, is an absolute, is a good tactic. And it's something that we should re-engage in, and I would encourage, whatever administration is in charge at Santa Fe to re-enter and rejoin that partnership. Because, wind and solar are variable resources, but the larger geographical area you're participating in, the less that variability is in any particular area, and the more it averages out to kind of a constant level. And so if we can participate in a larger electricity balancing area, it just makes everything easier. And that's what states are doing all around the country, at least some of them. So yes, I agree with you. We should participate and rejoin the grid. Yeah. You had a second question?
Yeah, the second question is, recently the Commonwealth nations, the English Commonwealth, held a conference in London around the idea of going beyond just replacing existing carbon production to sequestering. And it's based on a book by Paul Hawken that just came out called Drawdown. And it involves food, how we work with our soil, how we work with forests. It involves city planning, it involves buildings, et cetera. There are 100 different strategies, and several of them would apply to New Mexico. Pardon me?
I have the book.
Good. Do you? Oh, good. So what I'm asking is, have you, the 350.org NM, have you begun to look into what we could do in the way of sequestering strategies, which draws down the carbon?
I would say that we haven't looked into it. I am aware of the work, and I applaud it, and it's absolutely necessary. Storing carbon in soil is one of the best ways to sequester carbon. It makes the soil healthier, and it's a way to pull some carbon out of the atmosphere. It should be done. There are organizations actively working on it, including here in New Mexico. It's a slight modification to farming methods, and I think carbon farming is one of the things they call it. You can Google that term and get information on it. I support it wholeheartedly. It's just not something that we've invested our time and effort in yet.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we have time for a couple more.
The name of the book was called Drawdown by Paul Hawken, H-A-W-K-E-N. Yeah.
Are you ready for the next?
Yeah, please.
My name's George Jurasic, and I'm a former professor from UNM and retired now, and have worked in geothermal, and particularly in the 1970s. So I have some feeling for what's required to do a 10 megawatt plant every year. In fact, we finally got one in the Animas Valley, as you know. And by the way, I commend the talk you gave. It's full of wonderful information and hard facts. If I wasn't mistaken, you said the plan would be for 200 megawatts a year?
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that that's very, very aggressive. If I take 200 megawatts a year, that's for 200,000 people, roughly. Unless, do you know the per capita need in New Mexico for power?
Yeah, 901 kilowatt hours per month.
Okay, I was estimating 1,000. It's 1,400 for the country. So around 1,000. I did a quick calculation, might be wrong, that in 15 years, if you had 200 megawatts a year, you would have enough extra that power to take care of the Four Corners and San Juan plants, which I think would be about what New Mexico needs, of over 3,000 megawatts. So it seems aggressive for me to at least that you have this 200 megawatt initiative per year. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. It seems a lot.
If you'd like to meet with me separately, and I'll be happy to go through my spreadsheet with you. I started with the United States Energy Information Agency published New Mexico electricity sales for the state, which is 23 terawatt hours, I think. No, it's gigawatt hours of electricity divided by the New Mexico population. That gets you the total consumption. Right. And then you put in, you basically follow Professor Jacobson's model. He adds about another 12% of generation required for peaking and storage, and you have to include capacity factors for all renewable sources. So that it's nameplate capacity that we're building to supply the electricity. It's not 24/7 power generation, right? Because solar is, I don't know, 30% capacity factor. Wind may be more like 40 to 45%. Geothermal is probably 90. So you plug in all of those factors and you end up with maybe more nameplate capacity that at first blush you would think you needed. But that's the reason why.
I'll just add that geothermal is the least expensive, as you know, levelized cost for energy.
Yeah.
It is definitely the lowest.
Yeah, so I
Plug for geothermal there. Yeah.
I hate to say this, but there are others who are coming into this chamber. I would love to invite you. It's a beautiful, sunny, typical New Mexico day, Santa Fe day, to maybe go out into the outside area between this building and the convention center to continue, if Tom has the time, to ask questions. And the commission is going to move back to the city council conference room to continue its regular business. But I thank you very much, Tom, for...
Do you mind if I take your picture?
Not at all.
Thank you. All right, all you lovely